Guys, welcome back. I have to say I'm very thankful for everyone that came out today and shared and has been on the panels, and there's still a lot more to come. I have to say, personally, I was extremely happy when my friend Robert here agreed to come out to this crazy meeting of young people trying to get all fired up and get some knowledge and share some of his knowledge. So, ladies and gentlemen, Robert Greene.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is his mic good?
Can you hear me?
There we are. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Robert's work, he wrote the 48 Laws of Power, Laws of, there it is in the front row, Laws of Seduction,
The Art of
Art of Seduction, sorry, I apologize, the 50th Law with 50 Cent, Laws of Human Nature, Mastery, what am I missing?
the 33 Strategies of War.
33 Strategies of War, amazing, what'd you say?
That's it.
That's it. Okay, amazing books, all books that I think I just can't recommend enough to this audience, and the type of things that you guys are into and the type of things that you guys are inspired by. I mean, Robert's work is next level. The amount of research, the amount of thought that goes into it, it's not motivational, rah-rah, weird stuff. It's real research. Real information. And look at that. Look at that, Robert. And, thank you, Esther Billionaire.
Thank you.
And what I'm blown away by, I was just talking to Robert, is Robert just walked in and he was hanging out in the back, and like, you would have thought, you know, Kobe Bryant just walked in or something.
I wish I was in his league.
You are, man. You have real fans and real, I think, the respect for your work, even in this crowd of young, the new next generation of entrepreneurs and all that stuff. I don't know. It's fascinating to see, and it makes me, I told you, it makes me very hopeful about where the world is headed.
Yeah.
You know?
I've done a lot of talks with a lot of business groups and entrepreneurs, but this is by far the most interesting group of business people and entrepreneurs I've ever seen.
Woo!
I'm very excited. This is what it should be like. This is the kind of audience I should be talking to.
Agreed. Okay, so this is what a perfect place to start. We did a podcast about a year ago, and it was one of my most well-received podcasts that I've done. And what I was the most fascinated by was your younger years, right? I think you picture a guy like me, pictures a guy like you. I imagine that you were just studying and researching your whole life. And that is far from the truth, and I think that maybe that's why you fit in so well here. But you were a bit of a rebel as a young man, and being an author wasn't even really on your mind, it didn't sound like, in the early years. Can you tell people a little bit about what you were like before this opportunity to start writing came up?
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles. I had a really wonderful childhood here. I love LA. And I was a rebel as a teenager. I had hair down to here. I got really into drugs and the whole drug scene in Los Angeles. Then I kind of got into... And I kind of got my act together in college, cut my hair, sort of started studying. And then I just had a restless soul. I wanted to see the world, and I traveled all through Europe. I worked in a hotel in Paris, which is where I learned the art of seduction, the real art of seduction. And I had many different jobs. I thought I was going to be a writer, but I just couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. And I tell a lot of young people, it's okay when you're in your 20s and you don't know exactly what you want to do, as long as you're serious and you have some idea of the kind of subjects that interest you. It's a time for adventure and learning about yourself, and that's what I did. And I had so many different jobs, and I encountered so many weird people, so many horrible, psychotic bosses, and I had all these different experiences that I was then later able to funnel into the 48 Laws of Power.
And I want to clarify this too, because I think a lot of people read the 48 Laws of Power, or probably more so the people who don't actually read it, they just look at it, and they think that you wrote it with sort of this dark angle and this like teaching people how to manipulate other people and stuff like that. And you explained to me that that's not at all how you wrote it, and it came from a very different place for you. Can you tell?
Well, I think a problem that we have, we humans, is that we're kind of embarrassed about our own desires. And I think it's natural for a human being to want to have power. Who wants to feel helpless? Who wants to feel that they have no control over their destiny, over their boss, over their career, over their children? We all want power in life, yet we're afraid to admit it. We have to run through all these hoops and say, oh, I'm really about saving the world or saving the planet, which is fine. I have nothing against that. But you also want power. You have ambitions. It's natural. Don't be ashamed of it. There's nothing wrong with that. So I wanted to write this book that said, stop being such a hypocrite. This is how power works. You want it, and that was sort of the impetus behind it. And the other thing is, I worked in Hollywood for many years, and I was pretty young, naive person, and a lot of people manipulated me. I wasn't really this shark, this Machiavellian evil genius. I was actually quite naive. And so I wanted to write the book to help other people like myself who don't really understand power, who've been manipulated by people, who don't really know how the world works. So I wanted to help, in some ways, the little guy in navigating this very difficult environment. And it was interesting, after the book came out, it became a huge success among rappers in the hip-hop world, which is how I met 50, and other people like Jay-Z, et cetera. And they told me that they were in a similar position. They were all at a moment where they were trying to segue into becoming entrepreneurs, where they were going to own their own music and not be in the typical position of being the black artist exploited. And they were naive. Even 50 admitted he had never encountered such a ruthless Machiavellian environment as the music industry. So the book kind of helped open their eyes to the realities of how power works.
What was not to skip ahead too much, but I want to, because we have a limited amount of time, I want to make sure I get good stuff here. What was the inspiration or what sort of was sparked in you to come up with the idea for Laws of Human Nature?
Well, I wrote a book called Mastery, in which I was trying to teach you how to become a master in your field, whatever that is, how to reach an extremely high level of creativity, have an intuitive feel for your work. And one of the chapters I wrote was about social intelligence and the importance of understanding people. So you could be a brilliant entrepreneur, you can understand all the technical aspects of business, but if you don't know people, if you don't understand their psychology, you don't realize how weird people can be and how unpredictable, all of your technical knowledge won't come to anything. So I wrote that chapter, and people who read it said, Robert, I really, really liked that chapter. It really resonated with me, but I need more. I need more information. And I listen a lot to my readers. They often tell me which direction to take in my next book. And I decided I would actually do that. I would expand and write the kind of ultimate book on human psychology, on human behavior, on what are the laws that govern human behavior, to sort of fill this incredible need that I felt a lot of people were, at least the feedback I was getting from Mastery.
Do you think that in this current age of social media, and everyone says, we're kind of more connected than ever now, but like less understanding, if that makes any sense. Do you think that people are ignoring these laws of human nature more than ever? Does it feel that way to you, or no?
Yes, I mean, it's in some ways, you look at, there's a lot of kind of frustration. I think people don't know how to read people that they're dealing with. So I do a lot of consulting work with some very famous, very powerful people, and you'd be surprised how people who are extremely successful don't understand basics about human psychology. They hire the absolute worst business partner, or they get involved in the absolute worst kind of intimate relationship because they don't judge people by their character, by the underlying psychology. They look at their charming surface, their glittering resume, then they hire the wrong person, and they cause incredible amount of suffering. So I think it's a tremendous problem because a lot of the technology that we're now using and so immersed in makes us much less observant about people. We're not paying enough deep attention to people we're dealing with. And the other thing is, I think a lot of people, entrepreneurs and people who start businesses now, don't have a real grasp of their audience, of what's motivating people, of what the spirit of the times are. So I've consulted with people who started cryptocurrency businesses or who have done new social media platforms, and I'm always surprised by their naivety. Like, you don't understand that criminals at the dark side of human nature isn't going to get involved in cryptocurrency and ruin it for the rest of us. Certain basic things, certain basic laws about what motivates people and the dark side of human nature, I think a lot of people just simply don't understand right now.
And one thing you talk about too is how, you kind of touched on it, is how usually what you see of someone is it's almost the opposite of what's really going on. So you see someone who's so confident and has all their chains and all their stuff, and they're actually very insecure. And sort of that goes across all things. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, if you take one thing away from hearing me today, it's that you don't want to be judging people by their appearances, by the masks or the front that they present you, because people learn very early on in life to compensate for their own weaknesses and their own vulnerabilities and to present the mask that they think is going to please and impress you. They're going to be nice and pleasant, and if they're feeling envy or if they're feeling some resentment or if they don't really like you, they can be very good at disguising it. So you have to be able to detect the signs of what's really going on behind all those fake smiles that you see, etc. And one of the telltale signs that I talk about in this book is that when people show you some really strong, overt quality, they're really tough and macho, or they're really self-reliant, or they're such a complete rebel, often that's a sign that they're actually covering up the opposite trait. They're covering up deep wells of insecurities. And so knowing that can help you a lot in dealing with them. You don't have to feel so intimidated in their presence. You can see the kind of scared little child behind the very brave front they're trying to present. You can see into their character by kind of learning to not take that strong appearance that they present for the reality. In fact, it often is a sign of the opposite.
What do you, because you've now done all this research on these type of topics and written about them, how has it affected how you go through your days? Do you find yourself checking yourself, making sure that you're not doing that and making sure that you're not judging people like that? Has it made you a super guru, or how's it affected you?
No, it was kind of an eye-opener, because I'm sitting here writing a chapter on narcissism, for example, and I'm going, damn it, Robert, you're kind of a narcissist yourself. Then I'm writing a chapter on aggression, and I'm going, damn it, man, you're a really aggressive person. You can be kind of an asshole yourself sometimes. On and on and on. I had a lot of the traits that I was writing about. It was actually kind of a humbling experience. I mean, I don't want to get rid of my aggression. I'll always be a kind of an aggressive person. But, it kind of chopped me down a peg. It made me realize that I have quite a few character flaws myself. And so, I could judge people less. One of the main themes in this book is to stop when you meet people, instead of trying to judge them immediately. Your goal is not to judge people, but to understand them, to have some empathy. I hate to use such a soft word as love, but even some feelings of love towards them, and to kind of try and understand what motivates them, as opposed to categorizing them instantly into somebody who's bad or good, who's likable or not likable. Instead, try and get outside of yourself and really find it kind of a pleasure to get inside the character of the people that you're dealing with.
Another topic that's in the book that's fascinating to me, and it was the one that like we made a really cool little piece of video content about it, and we put Kobe Bryant in the video, and it just went wild on the internet, right? It was talking about people's dark side and how to channel your dark side and use it to positive. And I think, at least the way I understand it, your dark side is that thing that can be responsible for a lot of your undoing, and a lot of the negative thoughts and negative stuff in your life. But some of the greatest people in history have learned how to channel that towards a positive or towards a goal.
Right.
Number one, is that even an accurate description of it? And how do you see it, or what did you find?
Yeah, it's very accurate. I mean, when I'm talking about your dark side, just very briefly, when you were a child, you were sort of this complete person. You kind of just acted spontaneously. You acted on your own impulses. Some of them were a bit naughty. Sometimes you weren't the nicest boy or girl in the world. But that is who you were. You were an authentic, complete person. And then as you get older, you tend to tamp down all of those kind of darker qualities that some people might find a bit brash or they may not like so much. And so all of these other parts of your personality get pushed down into what we call the shadow part of your personality. And sometimes that shadow will leak out, like you're under a lot of stress and suddenly you'll scream and rant at people, and that mask that you wear falls off. And so I want in this book, in that chapter, to make you aware that we all have this dark side. I certainly do. And the most important thing to realize is you want to come to terms with it. It's like a little child inside of you that's kind of naughty and mischievous, and I want you to accept it and bring that back into your life and not try to always repress and always be such a good person. Sometimes your darker impulses actually have a lot of power behind them. Sort of that aggressive, competitive spirit that like a Kobe Bryant has, where he's gonna beat everyone, he's gonna be number one in anything he tries. Channeling that into something great like basketball is very powerful and productive. But if you look at anybody who's very successful in life, like I look at Steve Jobs. This man was not a very nice person. He wasn't easy to get along with. He could be kind of brutal with people. And yet when we venerate him as probably one of the greatest entrepreneurs that ever lived, we tend to disregard that part of his personality as if that wasn't a key element in his success. The fact that he was ruthless, the fact that he was a perfectionist and wouldn't put up with the crap that other people would normally put up with, that was part of his success. So your persistence, the fact that you're a perfectionist or that you're somewhat ruthless in getting what you want, if you channel it into your work, if you channel it into something productive, it can be very positive. And the other thing is, if you look at people in culture who are kind of out there, who kind of display their dark side, a lot of the times we don't criticize them, we actually like them because they're more authentic. A lot of artists are like that. And so I think you have room for letting out more of these sides of your personality that you're kind of maybe a little bit scared of, because I think people will actually like you more for being more of an authentic human being.
Do you see it as like almost like a muscle to train, like wrangling that dark side? Like, is it like learning how to wrestle alligators? Or is it like, you know what I'm saying? Is it something you should be working on to learn how to channel this thing? Or how do you see it?
Well, I describe in the end of the chapter on your shadow side how I think you should channel it. And the first thing I tell it is you have to become aware of your own shadow. You have to look at yourself very deeply. You have to see the fact that there are parts of yourself that you are disguising. We talked earlier about extreme behavior, and maybe you have extreme behavior, and maybe that is revealing something that you're trying to hide even from yourself. I know that me personally, I'm extremely self-reliant, independent person, and I've understood in looking at that that's really hiding a kind of a wounded child, that as a child, I had to fend for myself. My parents weren't really, really caring for me as deeply as I thought they should. And so I've turned myself into this insanely self-reliant person, but underneath it is something else. There's something kind of helpless and vulnerable about that. So I have to see that part of myself. You have to see your own dark side first and accept it. and kind of love it and bring it into your life first. And then you have to find ways of channeling it productively. But, the first thing is, if you're like an artist, for instance, I have a lot of anger personally. I don't know where my anger comes from. Maybe it's, I don't like people's hypocrisy, which is sort of the inspiration for the 48 Laws of Power. I want people to just be who they are, and there's sort of a lot of anger inside of me, and I channeled that anger into my books. If you read the 48 Laws of Power, I think you can detect an undercurrent of kind of anger in there. And I have to use that for all of my books. If I don't have anger in my books, it doesn't feel authentic. It feels like it's not coming from the right place. That's how I took my own dark side and put it into my work. And I tell artists, if you're making a film or you're writing music, don't be afraid of that anger. Don't be afraid of those hostile feelings. Don't try and repress them. Put them into your work. If you make a film that channels and vents some of that anger that we all feel and we're repressing, audiences will be drawn to it like a magnet, because we all have to pretend to be so nice in this world that being able to display some of your own frustrations and angers and resentments is actually a healthy thing. So that's sort of the way I personally approach exercising my own dark side.
You also talk about how we see the world through so many different biases, right? Like we have all this fog over our lenses of what reality is and what situation we're actually in. Can you just talk a little bit, I know that's a little broad of a question, but can you just talk a little bit about the different sort of filters we're seeing through and how we can see a little bit more clearly?
Well, the main thing is to realize that you're not seeing people around you as they really are, that you're seeing them through the filter of your own emotions, through your own childhood. You're seeing them as reflections of your mother or father, or as siblings, or as teachers you hated or liked when you were a child. You're not seeing reality. You're not seeing people as they are. You're not seeing the world as it is. You're projecting all of your own emotions, your own wishes onto the world. You're seeing what you want to see. And so the task in life, and this has been the subject in all of my books, it was one of the main themes in the book that I wrote with 50 Cent, is to get at reality, is to see things as they are. And first, if you're able to realize that you're not, that you're projecting onto people your own emotions, then maybe you can step back and say, all right, I have to look at this person differently. I have to pay more deeper attention. I have to not realize that they're like my mother or father or some authority figure in the past. They're just a different human being. They're not intimidating. They're not going to necessarily hurt me. They're just different from me. And I'm not going to see them through the lens of my own fears, because a lot of this has to do with fears that we have. And so just the ability to realize and have some humility that you actually don't know people. You don't, even the person that you had a relationship for 15, 20 years, you don't really know them. They have secrets, they have dark sides, they have a hidden side that you're not looking at. And just being aware that you don't know people, you don't know your employees, you don't know your partners, is enough to motivate you to try and figure out maybe what's really going on behind the mask that they're wearing. So that's the most important thing for uncovering your biases. And also realizing that we humans are governed by our emotions. We tend to think of ourselves as these incredibly intellectual, rational creatures, but really it's our emotions that fuel us. And it's hard to understand where your emotions come from. I'm not going to get into too many details in this. I talk a lot about it in the book. But when you get angry, you don't really know why you're angry. You think it's because this person said something that upset you, but in fact, there are issues going back to your childhood, to 5 or 10 years ago, to things you've never come to terms with. You don't really understand your own emotions. And so you have to do some work on yourself. And instead of just simply acting on your anger, step back and go, why am I angry? What is really going on inside of me? What is the source of this emotion? These are all kind of steps you can do starting now that will help you overcome some of these biases we're talking about.
Which one of your books made the biggest impact on you?
On me?
Yeah.
Well, it'd have to be the 48 Laws of Power, because the 48 Laws of Power, prior to that, I was 36 years old. I was this kind of failure in life. My parents were about to write me off. You know, I had all these different jobs. What was Robert going to amount to? You know, he was totally restless. And, you know, I had no respect, and I was getting quite depressed. And then I had this opportunity to write a book. And this is an important lesson for people, because there are opportunities out there, and you may not be ready for them, or you may not recognize them as an opportunity. And when I had the chance to write the 48 Laws of Power, when I met this man who is a book packager, a light bulb went on in my head, and I go, man, this is my one chance. You know, talk about get rich or die trying, this was it for me. You know, I'm either going to write this book or I'm going to commit suicide at the age of 36. And so, and then I wrote the book. I had so much energy. I was so desperate. I wrote it, and I can't even believe I wrote that book in 2 years. It took me 5 fucking years to write The Laws of Human Nature. You know, I know I'm getting old and slowing down, but still. And then suddenly, you know, everything turned around in my life. Suddenly it was like a fantasy. It was like Aladdin's lamp. I went from this kind of loser in this sort of dingy one-bedroom apartment in Santa Monica. Suddenly, you know, I'm sitting there consulting with 50 Cent, politicians in Italy and former presidents, et cetera. It was like some weird ride, you know. But so that by itself, by the change in my life, that had the biggest influence.
And And what about, the answer can be the same, it could be the same book, but I'm just guessing, I could be wrong the way I'm looking at it, but I'm guessing that you find a topic, you know from either the readers or whatever it is, this is what I'm gonna work on. You research it, you do all this work, and there has to be things throughout that process that surprise you and shock you and maybe even scare you and whatever. Was there any book more than the others that the research and the knowledge you gained from researching the book changed the way you behave more than any of the others?
Well, I have to live the books that I that I write, because they're very immersive moments. You know, for the 2, 3, 4, 5 years that I'm writing the book, that's all I'm doing. I'm just thinking about it night and day. So when I'm writing The Art of Seduction, my second book, yeah, I'm going out there, and I may not be, you know, I was in a relationship at the time, so I might not be going out and seducing women, but I'm practicing what I'm writing about as an experiment. I want to try it out on the world. And so the Laws of Human Nature, I had this process where I met people, a lot of people, they didn't know I was doing this experiment, but I was sort of watching them and observing them and taking notes later on about things I could incorporate in the Laws of Human Nature. So I'm always mixing real life with the books that I'm writing. And yes, they very much change me.
What, if you could, this is a pretty maybe unfair question. If you have all of these books that you've written, it's so much information, and it's all passed through your head. You've lived it, you've written it, you've researched it. Is there anything from all that knowledge gained that you could tell people as advice in a short, like, hey, this is what I've kind of gathered, like, treat people this way, or don't do this to people, or look out for yourself? Or is there anything like that you have in your head that's kind of a condensed, like if someone came to you and said, Robert, just please tell me how to live a better, happier, more fulfilled life. What do I do? What would you say to that person?
I think the most important thing, and sort of a theme in all of the books, is about having self-awareness. I know it's a bit of a cliche and it's just a word, but I think a lot of people don't really know who they are. So, you know, in the 48 Laws of Power, a big theme was self-control. You know, don't talk so much when you go into a meeting or you're negotiating. Talking a lot is a sign of weakness and is going to actually hurt you in the long run. So be aware of your tendency that you tend to probably talk too much. Be aware, think of it. And I talk about that in all of my books. And it seems like, well, I know myself. If I don't know myself, you know, I spend all my time with myself. Obviously, I know who I am, but you don't. You really don't. You're spending a lot of time thinking about what other people think about you. You're on social media. Am I missing out on what other people are doing? Am I thinking and doing the cool things that I'm reading about? And you're not actually paying attention to what makes you distinctive and weird. You know, the thing I learned the most from the 48 Laws of Power, which I wish I could engrave put a tattoo on all of you of this, is that being weird and unique is actually your source of power in life. The 48 Laws of Power, you might hate that book, but you've never seen anything like it, right? The way it's designed, the structure, and the kind of tone that I take. I went out and I took a huge risk because that book could have flopped because I'm not following what anybody else wrote. I'm being myself. That book is a complete reflection of my own weirdness and uniqueness. And you have something like that. I talk a lot about that in Mastery. You have something very unique and weird and different about you. And you're not necessarily using that. You're not mining that. And that weirdness, that idea of yours, that energy of yours that's unique to you is not something to be afraid of. It is just source of your power. It's like Superman. That's where your power comes from. And you're ignoring it, and well, you're just going to be like everybody else. Do you think anybody that you admire or is successful in life, you look at them, are they like other people? No, they're one of a kind. That's what makes them successful and powerful. We can't say we know anybody else like them. Well, I want that to be your life story. So by knowing who you are, by knowing what makes you unique, by knowing what your real tastes are and what really drives and motivates you, that is the source of your power, and that is the single most important theme in my books, I believe.
Last one. What's the next book? Give us the secret.
Well, it sounds, I get a little reluctant because it seems like kind of a letdown, but I had about 8 or 9 months ago, I had a stroke and I nearly died, which is why I'm kind of walking around in a cane. And, I write in many of my books about confronting our mortality and death. I wrote about it in the 50th Law because 50 Cent had a very powerful near-death experience, a lot more powerful than my own. I wrote about it as this kind of intellectual thing, and then it was the last chapter in my last book, and then 2 months later, bam, the irony, gods were waiting for me. I had my stroke, and it became something very real to me. It's no longer this sort of vague intellectual concept. And so I think that our mortality, our death, is not something to be afraid of. It's actually a beautiful thing if you can learn to embrace it. It's the source of a kind of urgency about life. It's a source of appreciating the few moments that you have. It's the source of being kind of, wow, I'm connected to all these other living things at the same time. It's the source of this kind of awe about how weird and awesome life is. So that's my next book. It's about what I call the sublime. I know it's a different direction for me, but sometimes I have to write books that make me excited, and I hope it excites the reader as well. But that's sort of the direction I'm taking for my next book. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.